You need to understand that, and surrounding it's gonna be number 42. Number 42 is going to be the secondary auditory cortex. So 42 is the secondary auditory cortex. 44 and 45 is known as the Broca's speech area. It's only activated in the dominant hemisphere. So it's going to be dominant hemisphere only. Bless you. Yep.
So, is that as well contralateral? So like.
No, so this is, so the Broca's speech area is going to be important for talking, and it's only going to be activated in one area. So it's going to actually control the muscles that are going to allow you to speak, but for both sides of the body. So they'll actually send information to both hemispheres to allow for that communication to take place.
Is that one specific area of anybody, or is it dominant to the person?
It's going to be, so usually left-handed people, their right hemisphere is more dominant. Left-handed people, it's right hemisphere. Right-handed people, it's actually a lot of right hemisphere. So it's mostly right hemisphere that's going to be dominant for most people. I have to look up the numbers. I have that somewhere about the percentage. I'll find that for tomorrow. Uh, 9, 10, 11, right here, up in the front. So that's on the frontal lobe. 9, 10, 11 is going to be the prefrontal cortex. It's the center for your personality and character traits. So those are the numbers that you are responsible for. We will add in some other areas for special senses. We already talked about a couple of the special senses, but when we talk about the special senses, we'll say all of where those special senses are located on the cerebral cortex, except for equilibrium, because equilibrium is very complicated and doesn't really have a cerebral cortex area where you become consciously aware of equilibrium. You sort of feel the effects of equilibrium. So it's a little bit different. So we'll come back to this when we do the special areas.
So just to confirm, for
Yep.
the visual association area,
Yep.
we're just looking at 18?
Yeah, just go with 18. We'll go with your textbook. So obviously the brain is very organized, and this is just the beginning of the organization, because when we look at the precentral gyrus and we look at the postcentral gyrus, we're actually going to see even further organization, creating something called the homunculus, which means little man. If you take out, what they've done here is they've taken out, this is anterior, this is posterior, and they've taken the precentral gyrus out and flipped it like a book. They've taken the postcentral gyrus out and flipped it this way. So we're looking at a precentral gyrus and a postcentral gyrus from a sagittal section, from a coronal section. And if you look at that cerebral cortex along the surface, you see that there is a small man that's drawn along the surface. And that's because these neurons are incredibly organized. And so they know that if they stimulate this area right here, which is in the longitudinal fissure, they'll actually cause the foot to contract. If they stimulate this area right here, they'll cause sensation in the foot. And so if you've ever seen, I think it's Travelocity or something like that, you see the neurosurgeon going in and he's like, oh, I'm so busy. And you see the patient's hand coming up and starting to type. What they're doing is trying to activate the precentral gyrus so he can make plane ticket arrangements on Travelocity while he's in surgery. So they're playing with that precentral gyrus. Not real, but you know what I mean. So this is the homunculus. And so the way to kind of think about the homunculus is it's organized so that this is the longitudinal fissure, so that's along the midline. This is out here laterally. It looks like the homunculus took his head off. He's standing in the longitudinal fissure and diving over the side. So in the longitudinal fissure, in this little loop here, is all the lower limb. as you come up and over the edges and start coming down the side, we get to the hip. This area here is connected to one another. It's called a paracentral lobule. Paracentral lobule. P-A-R-A, central lobule. It controls the lower limb for both motor and sensory. But once you get to the hip, we start coming over the side, like this. We then get to the trunk, shoulder, arm, elbow, works the same way here. Then to the hand, then to the face. And you can see that the distribution of the body is not normal. You see very big lips. You see very big hands. You see very small feet and legs. So if you think about it, the thighs are one of the largest parts of the body, but it doesn't have a lot of area. It has to do with how many neurons are associated with the activity of that area. If you think about it, you don't want very fine control of the muscles of your thigh. You basically want to say, okay, everybody contract, or maybe a couple people contract, and so you have very large motor units, and so you don't have a lot of neurons controlling the muscles of the thigh. But think about the movements you want to do with your hands. Very delicate movements, and so sometimes you want very small motor units so that you only bring in a small number of skeletal muscle cells at a time, and so you have a lot more neurons for all of those motor units that you have associated with the hand. Same with sensation. If you think about it, the areas of the body that have the most sensation, have the most sensory components associated with it are going to be the lips and the fingertips. And so what we see is that we have a lot more information coming in from those areas, and so we need a lot more areas to deal with that information. A lot more neurons connected to those sensory receptors that are bringing that information. Then say to the back. It's really interesting, if you go up to somebody and put your fingers on their back and go like this and go, how many fingers am I touching it with? It's really hard for them to tell. You put 2 fingers, you put 3 fingers, and they actually can't tell because the 2-point discrimination on the back is not real good. There's not as many sensory receptors there as, say, you did it on your fingertips, did it on lips. They would be able to definitely tell how many fingers were touching those areas. Does that make sense? So the cortical area devoted to things like muscle, involved with skilled, complex, and delicate movements. A lot more areas will be for those than say on those, and then also for the sensation as well. You have a lot more receptors, and in a particular area like the lips or the fingertips, you're going to have a lot more neurons to deal with that information coming in. Why don't we take a 5-minute break, come back and finish up the cortex.